Welcome to this short briefing on SBP version 2.1. This module is designed for auditors and certified organizations who are already qualified or certified against the version 2.0 standards. We won't revisit the fundamentals. We'll focus exclusively on what has changed, where it matters for your audit and conformance work, and what you need to do differently. Version 2.1 was published on the 29th of April 2026 and becomes effective 3 months later, on the 29th of July 2026. A 15-month transition period runs to the 28th of October 2027. Let's get started. Here's how this briefing is structured. We'll start with framing, the context for 2.1, the key dates, and how to read the materials in this deck. Then we'll work through each standard in turn. Standard 1, Feedstock compliance, 3 new indicators, 4 revised and changes driven by EU RED 3 alignment. Standard 2, Feedstock verification, 4 new clauses and structural updates. Standard 3, certification bodies, the new quality reviewer role, an explicit end-user classification, extended timelines, and a new TMLA link. Standard 4, chain of custody, the 2% additive rule, a 3-digit product group ID, mass balance changes, and updated trademark and EU red claim requirements. Standard 5, data collection, extended scope, new DTS timing rules, and the sold as non-certified record. And finally, Standard 6, energy and carbon, the text is unchanged from 2.0, but we'll confirm that for the record. Let's begin with the framing. First, the context. Version 2.1 is an evolutionary update, not a wholesale revision. The same 6 core standards, the same normative framework, and the same certification model remain in place. 2 things drove the changes. First, alignment with the EU's Renewable Energy Directive 3. Second, a set of corrections, clarifications, and operational improvements identified during 2.0 implementation. Substantive changes are concentrated in standards 1 through 5. Standard 6's text is unchanged. On timing, 2.1 was approved by the SBP board on the 25th of February 2026, published on the 29th of April, becomes effective on the 29th of July, and the transition window closes on the 28th of October 2027. By that date, all certificate holders must be operating under 2.1. Before we dive in, a quick word on how to read this deck. Every change throughout this briefing is tagged, and the tag colors are consistent across all 6 modules. Dark teal means new, a brand new indicator or clause introduced in 2.1. Mid teal means revised, an existing indicator that's been reworded or rescoped. Sage green means clarified, a terminology or wording change where the substance is unchanged. Amber means moved, content removed from the standard and relocated to an instruction document. And gray means unchanged, listed for clarity where a section has no 2.1 change. Numbers like 1.1.3, 4.25, or 6.5 throughout the deck are clause and indicator references in the relevant standard. For full clause text and effective wording, refer to the published 2.1 standards and the companion overview of changes documents, which we'll look at next. Alongside the standards, SBP has published a dedicated overview of changes document for every standard and for the key instruction documents. There's one for each of the 6 standards, plus separate overview of changes for ID 1A on trees outside forests, Idaho 5E on energy and carbon data, and the glossary. These are your reference companions. This briefing gives you the headlines and the auditor lens. The overview of changes documents give you the full clause-by-clause detail. Keep them close as you work through implementation. We're now moving into Part 2, Standard 1, Feedstock compliance. This is where 2.1 brings the most visible alignment with EU rules. 3 new indicators, 4 revised, and the total now stands at 45. Let's see what's changed. Here's the picture for Standard 1. It now has 45 indicators, up from 42. 3 are brand new, 4 have been revised in wording or scope, and none have been removed. The headline is that feedstock sourcing rules are now more closely aligned with EU requirements. We've introduced explicit no-go sourcing areas, primary and old-growth forests, natural highly biodiverse grasslands, and heathland forming a climax stage. Sourcing from these areas is not permitted, and we've added clear, measurable requirements around maximum clear-cut size limits and deadwood retention thresholds. What does this mean for you in practice? 3 things. First, review your current sourcing practices against the updated indicators. Second, make sure you have documentary evidence on file wherever conditional sourcing applies. And third, be aware that EUDR is now explicitly referenced as an applicable legal requirement, particularly relevant if your biomass is exported to Europe. Let's look at the revised indicators in detail. 4 indicators have been revised in Standard 1. 1.1.3 on legal trade compliance now references EUDR explicitly alongside CITES and EUTR. The substantive scope is unchanged, but your evidence base broadens to cover EU deforestation regulation requirements. 2.2.4 on residues, stumps, and roots expands the scope to include roots and softens the threshold from no irreversible negative impacts to adverse impacts shall be minimized. Where extraction is allowable and occurs, impacts on ecosystems must be minimized. 2.2.6 emissions to air is a retitle only. Air emissions becomes emissions to air. Compliance is still tested against national legislation or industry best practice where no legislation exists. 3.2.3 on prohibited habitats is a more substantial rewrite. It now prohibits primary feedstock from primary forest, old-growth forest, heathland forming a climax stage, or natural highly biodiverse grassland, replacing the 2.0 wording about combined high carbon stock and HCV attributes. And here are the 3 brand new indicators. 2.2.13 introduces maximum thresholds for large clear cuts. Harvesting must comply with the limits defined by the country where the forest is located. This indicator engages directly with national forestry rules and is not applicable to trees outside forest, where clear-cut logic doesn't translate. 2.2.14 introduces deadwood retention requirements. Harvesting must comply with locally and ecologically appropriate retention thresholds for deadwood extraction. Again, not applicable to trees outside forests. And 3.2.4 introduces conditional sourcing for biodiverse and carbon-rich habitats. Primary feedstock may be sourced from highly biodiverse forests, peatlands, wetlands, or non-natural highly biodiverse grasslands only when there is evidence that sourcing does not risk diminishing the conservation values. Read this together with the rewritten 3.2.3. The evidentiary bar here is meaningful, not a loophole, and this one applies to tough categories. We're now moving into part 3, Standard 2, Feedstock Verification. 4 new clauses, structural revisions to the SBE applicability table, and consistent terminology throughout. Here are the changes to Standard 2 grouped by type. 4 substantive new clauses. 3.12, non-compliant feedstock overrides risk ratings. 5.3.5, supply-based verifiers must reflect current conditions. 5.4, reduced scope for benchmarked feedstock. And 7.4, risk management plan implementation and operator evaluation. Structural changes affect process and scope. A restructured SBE applicability table at 3.2, subscope set by the RRA or CRA at 1.1.5, a 6-month trigger for RRA status changes at 3.6.2, and stakeholder consultation at 8.1 now made conditional. And a set of terminology updates for consistency. Operators becomes suppliers in Section 1, BPP risk assessment becomes CRA, BP endorsed RRA becomes BPRA, and all operators becomes all activities within the supply base in 6.2. This slide is your map of all the changes in Standard 2 under version 2.1. 18 changes across 14 sections, 4 brand new indicators shown in dark teal, and 14 revised or clarified indicators shown in mid-teal. You don't need to absorb every clause reference here. Treat this as your reference. Over the next few slides, we'll zoom in on the 4 new indicators and walk through the most important revised points in detail so you understand what's expected and what you need to do differently. The remaining revisions are mostly wording or scope refinements. Refer back to this slide and the published standard for the full list. Let's look at the new clauses in detail. 2 on this slide, 2 on the next. 3.12 establishes a core principle. If feedstock does not meet standard 1, it is not SBP compliant, regardless of the published risk rating. When non-compliance is identified, 3 actions are required. First, reevaluate the risk assessment tools, review and update the RA, CAR, in RMM or RMP that failed to identify the non-compliance. Second, inform the certification body without delay with details of the situation. And third, the CB reports to SBP, which may trigger a scheme-level review of the risk conclusion. For auditors, a low-risk rating cannot be invoked to absorb evidence of non-conformance. The override is automatic. 5.3.5 adds a new step to the SBV process. Supply-based verifiers must reflect current conditions, not historical ones. This aligns Standard 2 with the risk evaluation framework. For auditors, probe how the biomass producer confirms its SBVs are still active and pertinent at the time of evaluation. The remaining 2 new clauses. 5.4 introduces a reduced scope for benchmarked feedstock, where an organization sources exclusively certified primary feedstock under an SBP benchmark scheme. The SBV identification and risk assessment scope is limited to the indicators not fully covered by that scheme. For auditors, confirm the exclusivity condition. Any non-benchmark primary feedstock remove the streamlined scope and test that the indicators not covered by the benchmarked scheme have been correctly identified. 7.4 introduces RMP implementation and operator compliance evaluation. 2 stacked obligations on the biomass producer. Implement any RMEMs marked as mandatory in SBP RNEs or other normative documents. And implement the RMP plus establish a process to evaluate operators' compliance with it. For auditors, this raises the bar from plan exists to plan implemented and verified down the chain. Test the BP's process for evaluating operator compliance, not only the RMP document itself. A few key structural revisions to flag. 3.2 restructures the SBE applicability table. New rows added for primary control claims and SBP recognized controlled material. 1.1.5 subscopes are no longer defined freely by the BP. They now follow the structure of the RRA or CRA. 3.6.2 introduces a 6-month trigger. An interim to endorsed RRA status change forces an SBE review within 6 months. And 8.1 makes stakeholder consultation conditional. SBVs and risk assessments or ratings are consulted on only where a CRA is used. RMP, RMMs, and means of verification are always consulted on. That covers Standard 2. We're now moving into Part 4. Standard 3, requirements for certification bodies. Some key changes include a new quality reviewer role, an explicit end-user classification, extended timelines, and a new TMLA link to certificates. Here's your map for Standard 3. 22 changes across 19 sections, 4 brand new indicators shown in dark teal, and 18 revised or clarified indicators shown in mid-teal. Standard 3 has a large number of changes in 2.1, so we'll focus on the 8 that matter most for your day-to-day audit work over the next slides. As before, treat this as your reference and refer to the published standard for the full list. These are the 8 changes in Standard 3 worth your attention. 1.1.1 ISO 14065 is now required for standard 6 audits, and there's a clarification on geographical scope. 4.1 The COC qualification is now sufficient for standards 1 and 2 in 4 defined low-risk cases. 4.2 to 4.8 A new quality reviewer role with the same qualification rules as auditors. 6.5 End-user classification is now made explicit as a third certificate type. 6.20 The CB may use an alternative sampling coefficient where justified. 10.1 Peer-reviewed triggers have been redefined. 8.9, 8.15, and 11.6 Timelines for major NCRs and certification decisions extended from 1 month to 3 months. And 12.13 and 14.5 Certificate validity extensions of up to 6 months, plus a new TMLA linked to certificates. Let's walk through these. Starting with CB eligibility and auditor qualifications. Section 1, 1.1.1 now requires ISO 14065 when Standard 6 is in scope, with the geographical scope of accreditation clarified. 1.1.2 sets accreditation as mandatory for Standards 4 and 5 and optional for Standards 1, 2, and 6. 1.1.5 adds SFI to FSC and PEFC as a proxy. And 1.1.7 ties geographical scope to the COC accreditation, not the forest management one. Section 4, Auditor and Quality Reviewer Qualifications. 4.1 is revised. The default is still the FM qualification for Standards 1 and 2, but the COC qualification now suffices in 4 cases. When the BP sells only SBP-controlled biomass, when EU Red Level A applies with all indicators low risk, when the SBPRA shows all indicators low risk, or when the BP source is only processing residues with an FSC or PFC recognized claim. And 4.2 through 4.8 formally introduced the quality reviewer role. The qualification rules mirror those for auditors: required education and work experience, registration in the audit portal, at least 3 audits within the last 12 months to maintain qualification, and ongoing SBP training, including witness audits. Now planning, sampling, and Annex 1 checks. 6.3 A certificate is only issued if instruction document EU Red is in the audit scope. 6.5 makes end-user classification explicit. 3 certificate types: biomass producer, trader, and end user. Any entity that consumes SBP-certified biomass is classified as an end user, regardless of whether Standard 6 is in scope. Where an end user also trades, that's recorded as a secondary activity, and end users must always be evaluated on-site. 6.23 allows an alternative sampling coefficient. The default formula remains y equals 0.8 times the square root of x for initial and re-evaluations, or 0.6 times the square root of x for surveillance. Under 2.1, the CB may use an alternative coefficient where justified and documented in the PSR. And 7.7 is revised. For processing residues and post-consumer feedstock, the CB must check compliance with Annex 1 of Standard 2. Now, timelines, certificate validity, and the TMLA link. 8.9, 8.15, and 11.6. The time frame for closing major NCRs and making certification decisions has been extended from 1 month to 3 months from the closing meeting. 8.15 also defines when an NCR against the SBE must be classified major. Cases include no SBE process in place, feedstock origin not credibly demonstrated, CRA not conducted per SBP requirements, SBPRA not used when available, feedstock from unevaluated sourcing areas without a scope change audit, missing control or mitigation measures, or required public information missing from the supply base report. 12.13 introduces a certificate validity extension of up to 6 months beyond the original expiry, only for circumstances outside both the CB's and the CH's control. 3 steps. Record the circumstances, inform SBP with rationale and a proposed new date, and await SBP review. This is considered case by case, has no precedent effect, and is not a planning tool. And 14.5 introduces a TMLA link. the status of the trademark license agreement now propagates to the certificate. Two more standard 3 changes worth noting. 10.1 redefines peer review triggers. Peer review is now required when any of these is in evaluation scope: a company risk assessment, an RRA with specified risks, or EU RED level B. This applies to initial evaluations, re-evaluations, scope additions including subscope, RRA with specified risks, CRA, EU Red Level B, and reinstatement of suspended certificates. And 12.12 is a clarification. The 5-year certificate validity cap has moved from Annex 1.10 into the main standard. No change in substance, same rule, just more visible. That covers standard 3. We're now moving into part 5, standard 4, chain of custody. Extended product types. The new non-woody additive rule, a 3-digit product group ID, mass balance updates, and new claim and trademark requirement. Here's the map for standard 4. 12 changes across 11 sections. 3 new indicators in dark teal. 9 revised or clarified in mid teal. Highlights to keep in mind: the 2% non-woody binder and additive rule at 3.5, non-fossil only. The SBP EU RED compliant claim that must accompany every SBP compliant or SBP controlled transaction at 4.24, and trademark use governed by the TMLA and the SBP mark use guidance at 4.25. On the revised side, extended product types at 1.4, outsourcing clarified at 1.26, mass balance changes at 4.10 through 4.15, and DTS guide enforcement at 4.20. Let's walk through the substantive ones. 6 change areas across management system, mass balance, and claims and trademarks. 1.4 and 1.26, the list of product types in scope is extended, and a clarification has been added that third parties must follow the organization's procedures. 3.5 introduces the 2% non-woody additive rule. Non-woody components used for technical purposes, binders, additives, may be included in the SBP claim if both conditions are met: less than 2% of total biomass weight and not of fossil origin. The rationale is practical. Separating such small quantities on invoices isn't feasible. 4.12 permits a 3-digit product group ID. Once A equals 9 is reached, the PGID can now be 3 digits, 101, 102, and so on, allowing further subdivision once the 2-digit space is exhausted. 4.10 sets balancing period rules. Maximum 12 months for biomass producers using primary feedstock only, that's forest plus TOF, capped at 3 months for residues, post-consumer, mixed feedstock, and for all biomass traders. 4.24 requires that an SBP EU RED compliant claim accompany every SBP compliant or SBP controlled sales transaction. And 4.25 governs trademark use through the TMLA and mark use guidance, including any approval requirements and limited to off-product promotional use only. Here's how the 4 claims clauses sit together in 2.1. 4.21 is unchanged, the SBP compliant claim, only for products in certificate scope that meet eligibility. 4.22 is revised. The SBP controlled claim now applies to biomass produced from feedstock conforming with either the SBP controlled or the SBP compliant definition. Reworded, substance widened slightly. 4.2 is unchanged. No SBP certified claim when mixed with non-certified woody biomass. 4.24 is new. The SBP EU RED compliant claim must accompany every SBP compliant or SBP controlled sales transaction. And 4.25 is new. Trademark use must follow the TMLA and mark use guidance for certificate holders, including any approval requirements. Off-product, promotional use only. That closes standard 4. We're now moving into part 6, standard 5, collection and communication of data. 2 SAR template rules have moved to ID5E, and 3 new DTS timing clauses have been added. 2 changes to flag at the standard 5 level. First, 2 clauses have moved out of the standard. Clause 2.3.1 on the pelletsar template selection rule and 2.3.2 on the woodchipsar template selection rule are now in ID5E. The rules are operationally identical. They've moved location, not substance. Auditors test the same conformance, just sourced from ID5E. Second, 3 new clauses in section 3.2 set transaction timing rules. 3.2.1 requires sharing the transaction in the DTS within 30 days of the sales date. 3.2.2 requires the recipient to accept or reject the transaction within 30 days of receipt. And 3.2.3 introduces the sold as non-certified record when an SBP claim is dropped downstream. Detail on the next slide. 2 30-day windows from 3.2.1 and 3.2.2. From the sales date, the legal transfer of ownership, the BP has 30 days to share the transaction in the DTS. The customer then has another 30 days to accept or reject. So the latest a transaction can be open is 60 days from sales date. And 3.2.3, the sold as non-certified rule, is designed to prevent volume from quietly disappearing from the DTS. When biomass is received with an SBP claim but sold without one, the corresponding volume must be recorded as non-certified. A worked example. 1,000 tons SBP compliant received, 800 tons go out with the SBP compliant claim retained. The remaining 200 tons must be recorded as sold as non-certified. Why it matters? The volume must not silently disappear from the DTS balance. The sold as non-certified record makes the dropout visible and reconcilable. We're now moving into Part 7, Standard 6, Energy and Carbon Balance Calculation. The text and clauses are unchanged from 2.0, but Standard 6 becomes effective in 2.1 form alongside the rest of the update. To be explicit, the text and clauses of Standard 6 are unchanged from 2.0. Standard 6 becomes effective in 2.1 form on the 29th of July 2026, alongside the rest of the 2.1 update. A heads up on what's coming alongside 2.1, the SBP GHG Calculator. This is an Excel workbook with VBA macros that reads activity data from the SAR, applies SBP approved methodology, and outputs GHG emissions and savings percentages. It ships with a user guide, an updated default value library, and is linked to the current SAR template. There will be a separate training module with a hands-on walkthrough and an end-to-end worked example released alongside the calculator. Looking ahead, beyond 2.1, several documents are under revision. 14 regional risk assessments and the FSC and PEFC benchmarking evaluations are due by end of July 2026. And the guidance documents for standards 1, 2, and 4 are due by October 2026. Watch for these as they are released. They'll support your implementation work. That brings us to the end of this 2.1 briefing. For full detail, refer to the published 2.1 standards and the overview of changes documents. 1 per standard plus ID 1A, Idaho 5E, and the glossary, all published on the 29th of April 2026. All normative documents are at our website in the normative documents section. If you have questions or need clarification, contact us via email. Thank you.